Okay, so I can identify a proportion. In order for us to talk about what a proportion is, we kind of need to take a step back and talk about what a ratio is first. So, I know you've heard this word from last year. A ratio is when you compare two different amounts or quantities. Okay? So, if I were to say to you the ratio of boys to girls in this class is 2-to-1. So, for every 2 boys in the class, there's 1 girl. Okay? You know that you can write it like this as a fraction, this, or with the word, right? So, we've talked about ratios before. We compare that. And order really matters here, right? So if I switched it around and said the ratio of girls to boys, then that switches and becomes 1-to-2, right? Okay? So if I said if the ratio of boys to girls is 2-to-1, and there are 10 boys, that must mean there are 5 girls, right? So you can look at it as fractions, right? So we are going to talk about the fraction part today as the ratio. Got it? So a ratio is basically like another way to say fraction. So now, if I take 2 ratios, like let's just take the easiest one that you can think of, and I put an equal sign next in between them, I take a ratio. I take a ratio that's equal to that ratio, and this is the easiest one. We all know that a half equals 2/4, right? When you take 2 ratios that are equal to each other together, that creates what we call a proportion. So, a ratio is when you have, or a proportion is when you have 2 equal ratios. And you learned this last year. You just called it something different. What's another thing that you called maybe in 6th grade a proportion? It's the same thing as what? Equivalent fractions. Good job. So that's the same as equivalent fractions. So guess what? 7th grade is kind of a lot of the same stuff. Like, you learn something that you know you already learned in 6th grade, except maybe we give it a different name. So boys in the back, I need you to pay attention, okay? All right, that's it. Yeah.
Could there be more than 2? Could there be like 3 or 4?
Yeah, absolutely. I could just keep taking 1/2 and make it 2/4 and make it 3/6. Give me another one. 8/16. Absolutely. I could keep going and going and going. Yep. So that all is a big proportion. So it's the same as equivalent fractions. We called them equivalent fractions in 6th grade. In 7th grade, we're going to call them a proportion. Okay? So just make sure that really you already know this concept and what it means. We're just giving it a different name right now. Okay? So when I have 2 equal ratios, which are fractions, it's called a proportion. Okay? And we know what equivalent fraction means. The story that I always tell when I tell equivalent fractions is I think of like a candy bar. So when I would pass out, I had candy bar, and I cut this candy bar in half, and I gave half to, my daughters who were a little older. And then I didn't want my son choking, so I took that half, and I cut it in half, right? And I gave him 2 pieces. They were just smaller, right? So then he would go to my daughters who are older than him, but he was younger. He would say, "Nana, boo boo, I have 2. You only have 1." And he didn't realize what? They have the same amount. They just had 1 big piece, and he had 2 little ones. But at that point, to a 2-year-old, 2 is more than 1, right? But so he didn't understand the concept of equivalent fractions or proportions. Yes.
It's like if you make a kindergarten and choose between 100 pennies or $1, they're going to.
Yes, that's a great idea. Did everybody hear what Alyssa said? She said if you make a child choose between, you can have 100 pennies or you can only have $1. They would probably choose 100 pennies because 100 is way bigger. So yes, the concept of equivalence at that age isn't there yet. And that's what, you learn in elementary school. So does everybody kind of understand what a proportion means? 1/2 is equal to 2/4 because it's equal. Because it's the same. Okay? So, when you have two equal ratios. So, a proportion. Hi. Eric, I know. Wake up, buddy.
I don't want to wake you up.
Yeah, I know. Oh, because it's quite a hassle.
It's an exciting class.
So yeah, sometimes they have to take me off the desk. It's like, wake up, Mrs. Z. Say hello, Mr. Kyer. You guys probably don't know Mr. Kyer, do you?
No.
They wouldn't. They never had the pleasure. What's that?
We got him before he started to drool.
Yeah.
We don't want to have drool on the desk.
No. You need a little
Too much to clean
a
up.
pillow.
Alright, I don't see a
That's okay.
I'm
just
gonna leave it.
yeah.
I
I'll
don't
unplug
like
it.
beeping.
Yep.
Oh, you're trying to smell good.
I know, I would rather have it smell good than.
We do need those.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't secretly spray
All right. See ya. Bye.
Yeah, thank you for letting me borrow.
You're welcome. Anytime.
You never know.
Sorry about that. A proportion will always have an equal sign. So let's go back up here to 1/2 equals 2/4 and talk about the difference of 1/2 times 2/4. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Hard to see. Now, if I were to multiply 1/2 times 2/4, you can cross cancel those, can't you? Can you cross cancel them in an equal sign? No, don't do that. Sometimes people get that confused, okay? So we're going to talk about it has an equal sign. You can't cross cancel. So I want you to take a look at, let's take 1/3. Can anybody come up with a fraction that equals 1/3? Mason? 2/6. Right? Everybody agree with that? Okay, and you could say he did that because he multiplied that times 2 and that times 2. 1 times 2 is 2, 3 times 2 is 6. Great. How about 4/5? Give me a fraction that equals 4/5, Michael. 8/10. Okay, so basically, are you seeing that what they're doing is, and you know what? They just chose 2 because it's probably the easiest thing, right? You can pick any number you want. Pick your favorite number and just multiply it by that number. So what if I chose to take 4/5 and multiply it by 7?
35.
I would have 35, I'm listening to, 28 over 35, and that's equivalent, right? Okay, yes.
You can cross cancel with the equal sign, but not with the dots.
No, you can cross cancel when you're multiplying,
Oh,
but not with the equal sign. So no cross canceling for this, okay? Because they're two separate amounts, all right? So now I want to ask you, just like remember how I asked you, is it a proportional relationship? And you said yes or no? I'm going to ask you the same thing. I'm going to give you two fractions and ask you if they are proportional. And you're going to put a yes or a no. So if I were to say 3/4, is that equal to 7/12?
no, it's not.
No, it's not. Why?
Because 3 numbers together is 7.
Yeah, because 4 times 3 is 12, but 3 times 3 should be 9. So we need to be watching up here. We don't need calculators. We don't need anything right now. We're just watching up here, okay? So 4 times 3 is 12. 3 times 3 is not 7. So this is not a proportion, okay? All right, so here's a trick. There's also another trick to do this. I'm going to go up here and show you with colors here. What's 2 times 2? What's 1 times 4? What's 3 times 2? What's 1 times 6? What's 5 times 8? What's 10 times 4? You may not know it, but 28 times 7 is going to give you the same answer as 35 times 4. So, did anybody remember doing this last year? Somebody called it the butterfly.
Oh, yeah.
Like that? So, guess what? These are called cross products. If you take the two in diagonals and multiply them, and take the other two diagonals and multiply them, and they're the same, it is a proportion. Got it? Because look, what is 4 times 7? What's 3 times 12? So, here's what I want you to write right now, and then I'll get your questions, James. A over B is equal to C over D as long as and only if A times D equals B times C. Is that confusing or does that make sense? Okay, so these two numbers times each other always need to equal these two numbers times each other. Got it? Okay. Good with that? So I'm going to give you, so that we have 2 ways, watch this, to figure, 3 ways. 3 ways to figure out a proportion. So as I'm looking at this number right here, do you think that's a yes or a no? It's a yes. And here's what's so cool about this. When I asked kids in other hours, 3 different ways they told me. I had somebody say what? Tell me one way. Somebody did the butterfly. They said because 3 times 20 is 60. Hey, and so is 6 times 10. What do you think the second way was that somebody told me? Brian. Well, not, I don't want you to say cross cancel. I want you to say cross products is what he just did. Alyssa? Multiply. She said I multiplied the 3 times 2 and the 10 times 2. What do you think the third way is? Division. Everybody got that? You either multiply, divide, or cross products. So here's the thing. If you start with the little, see what you multiply to get to the big. Or if you start with the bigger numbers, what did you divide to get that? So we're going to say, yes, this is equal. Okay? All right, now look. The numbers that are in the bigger are in the first spot. So my question to you is this. Just do it in your head real quick, because I'm going to ask you a question how you did it. 12 24ths and 2 fourths. What did you instinctively do? Yeah, Michael.
I saw it was equal because it's 12 and 24. It's equal to 1/2.
Okay. So he just looked at it and knew it reduced to 1/2. I tend to always find the smaller one, regardless of whether it's in the first or the second spot, and multiply and see what I can multiply. Times 6 times 6. That worked for me. Did anybody start with 12 and divide by 6? Did anybody do cross products? Lots of ways to do it. So here's what you're going to do.